Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, the calendar has turned over to March, and here over the last couple weeks, we've had a couple of those nice, warm, sunny days that make us start looking forward to planting season. I'm sure several of you have got your planters in the shop and you are about ready to go. So today we've got one of our favorite guests, Dr. Aaron Wilson, joining us to give us an outlook on what spring has in store for us. So welcome, Aaron.
Hey, it's good to be here again, Elizabeth. Hi, Amanda.
This is always one of our favorite episodes, but to start off with, we always like to take a look back at what we've experienced, and we are just wrapping up our meteorological winter. So do you want to give us an overview of what we saw, Aaron?
Yeah, I like that recognition too. Us crazy meteorologists, we end winter on February, the last day of February. So yeah, back in the fall, we talked about the upcoming winter season for sure. We were kind of looking at a drier than average winter. At least that's what I said, heading in because of pretty strong El Nino conditions. And we've talked a lot about El Nino on this podcast, warm temperatures in the tropical Pacific that tend to make the Ohio Valley pretty dry during the winter time. And that wasn't quite the case this year. So we'll dig into those numbers a little bit. But yeah, it's certainly one of the concerns we had coming off of last fall was we had our 13th driest fall on record going back to 1895. So we had some pretty low soil moisture deficits across the region, especially in west central and northwest Ohio. And the question was really, could we recover some of that soil moisture? And we didn't start out that way this winter in terms of pretty dry conditions in December, but January and February certainly have been a bit more on the soggier side of things, as you well know, out in the field, taking soil samples and such.
Yeah, it's been pretty muddy lately in some areas, but then in others, you talk about tile not barely running after. So wet on top, but maybe not down through the soil profile quite yet.
Yeah, and that's generally where I think we're sitting right now here in March. The top's pretty mucky in most areas. Deeper soil moisture deficits still exist across much of the state. And again, I would say the driest areas right now are extending from, say, northern Darke, Mercer. Darke County had a pretty recent heavy rainfall just this week, first week of March, over 3 inches in the southeastern portion of the state, the county. But Mercer County extending up into Ottawa County, that kind of stretch has been pretty dry. The rest of us have picked up some decent rainfall. So we'll get into some of those numbers here as we kind of crunch away, looking back at the past winter. So overall, looks like it's going to be the second warmest winter on record, which would overtake last year, which was the second warmest winter on record. Again, winter for us being December through February. December was the second warmest. We did have, a week of winter this year in the month of January. There's a lot of reports out there across all of the Midwest talking about this being the lost winter, the year of the lost winter, as Minnesota, Wisconsin, they've been even much more above average than what we are here. So we've had a few bouts of cold weather in January, February, but nothing too sustained.
I got an email from Michigan DNR, and they were promoting what people could do at their state parks without snow. And just a different mindset than we have here in Ohio. But that's the case. I mean, us past snowmobilers, we don't get to do it as much anymore because of that reason. And it sounds like that Michigan wasn't alone in the northern tier.
No. Incredibly low amount of sea ice on the lakes this year. One thing about as winters continue to warm, and we know that's been the trend, it's really a loss of a lot of cultural identity too when it comes to ice, ice fishing, tribal nations, indigenous peoples of the north, of Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin. They rely on those activities, and it's very for ceremonies and for other things. And so that's kind of a big impact that we've seen across the Midwest. In Ohio, people do go ice fishing, and certainly, but there are other impacts. Obviously, lack of ice. I've heard one this week that those that have buckets or bags on the maples and other syrups out there, have actually done damage and rutted up, as they've gone out to empty buckets and things. And that can cause some serious root damage and things like that. And of course, just not having the snowfall, which is another thing. We've run about, 25% or maybe at best half of normal across the state. And without that snowfall to protect some of those roots, same thing with maybe forages and other things. Obviously, that can lead to some damage there as well. So we haven't seen a lot of the really cold air overnight lows. Of course, we've also shifted our growing zones recently with the update to the USDA growing zone. And so for places like Columbus, where we only reached a low of 6 degrees in January, that's the coldest temperature we've reached. That's growing zone 7. So it certainly is a challenge for a lot of the reasons. Of course, it's more comfortable. It's not been too bad. Not as much frost to scrape off our windshields and that sort of thing. But with the temperatures being above average, soil temperatures have been quite warm as well. So that's another thing to think about this season. Southern Ohio really didn't see any freezing temperatures of the soil. Or no frozen soil, even at 2-inch or even 4-inch depth. So that's also contributing to some of the muckier conditions out there with the lack of freeze conditions. So we are well ahead of schedule, about 20 days maybe across Southern Ohio, with growing degree days getting close to 100 in those areas, even above 50 across the northern portion of the state. So another warm winter. That's where we're kind of sitting here.
I think it's setting us up for potentially an interesting growing season. We know we rely on those sustained cold temperatures to knock back some of our insects and diseases that affect our crops. And in a winter where we didn't get them, we might be up against something if other conditions work out to be favorable for those diseases and insects too.
Yeah, and it seems like we're on here every year talking about something a little bit different for our growing season and something maybe we didn't see. We're likely to see that. The other thing on a lot of folks' mind, there's a few things. Yeah, with the temperature and the advanced conditions, if you think about some of the horticultural impacts to maybe peaches and apples might be a concern. April freezes are not late. They happen almost every year. And if we continue to advance in terms of, things waking up and coming out of dormancy, that can set us up for more vulnerabilities as well. And like you said, the pests, the insects, potential diseases based on humidity levels and moisture and how we move through the season could open us up for that. But we also saw last year, the impacts of that stretch of dry weather that also wasn't anticipated in May and what that did in terms of residuals sitting there and not being activated and things like that. So there's always something different. I do think the warm, wetter conditions right now aren't too much of a problem, right? The wet conditions, at least on the surface, might slow our thoughts down a little bit, despite temperatures getting up in the low to mid 70s and folks want to get out there. But certainly as the landscape wakes up here over the next couple of weeks, vegetation will start to use that moisture as well. Of course, we've got to talk about the severe weather too. It was an interesting month of February. Normally, Ohio sees about 20 tornadoes annually. Last year was a very active season for tornadoes. We had over 50 in the state for the year of 2023. Already this year, we've seen 11. A lot of those came on the morning of February 28th last week. To get tornadoes in February is rare. It's not unheard of. This was the strongest tornado, in particular one in Clark County into Madison County, and is probably seen in the reports a lot of damage at Molly Caron, where Farm Science Review is held, but the surrounding areas sustained a lot of damage. EF2 tornado there, winds to probably 130 miles per hour. That's the strongest tornado in the month of February since the 1950s. So it's not unheard of. We've had it before, but the fact that it was occurring between like 4 and 6 a.m. is a lot strange for Ohio. That's not our typical time period for seeing those tornadoes. And those are so dangerous, right, to folks, because it's one thing to keep in mind is that tornado sirens are not meant for people that are inside. Those are only meant for people that are outside and are close to them. And so if you don't have multiple ways of receiving warnings, phones, or NOAA weather radios, those can be really dangerous situations. And so there's some questions now about what the severe weather season, how that'll play out as these air masses battle each other over the next 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, and of course, being in Madison County and right next to Molly Caron, we were right in the heart of it. And you're right, Aaron. I mean, we woke up because the power went out and we look at our phones and see there's a tornado warning. I mean, if it hadn't been for the alert system through our mobile devices, we probably would have had no idea. So the technology today is helpful. I mean, you can kind of hear the tornado siren where we're at, but only if you're listening for it and it's really quiet, which is not the case when there's a major storm coming through.
Yeah, and I think general advice too to think about severe weather, how can we be more prepared? I think the first thing is having those warnings, being able to get to those warnings, knowing the difference between watches and warnings, and just being situationally aware, weather aware, like we say, of the situation. And the forecast was indicating for a couple of days that we'd see that severe weather. The other thing is know your geography. Know where you live, know where your county is located on a map. So when you see those warnings pop up, you know exactly what to do. And I think that's critically important. There's a lot of people, for whatever reason, right? We all are guilty of this, that don't know exactly where we live, maybe in relationship to other counties, or even, some counties around us. We hear these counties and we don't know. So it's best to know your geography so that you're aware and ready to prepare. And of course, we could always help limit flying debris by keeping unstable things kind of secure, thinking about building materials or fuel tanks, roofing, siding, those sorts of things. If you've got any loose roofing or anything like that, making sure those are up to, kept up in terms of a maintenance can help limit flying debris. Just, sort of an aside of where we were targeting today's podcast, but I think it's important in light of this very dangerous situation that we just experienced.
Yeah, I think especially for this audience, it's important to consider. I was watching the news from here, seeing it head straight for Amanda's house, and they just kept saying, luckily this is a very rural area. And in my mind, I'm like, no, that's where so many of my friends live. And so the news media might de-emphasize the severity of the situation when they don't think a lot of people live there. So it's important that we're setting ourselves up to be safe in those situations.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
So let's talk about maybe some brighter news, Erin. And I know there are already some soybeans in the ground in Ohio. So when we talk about those wives' tales,
Hold up.
For sure, Amanda. Social media says they're out there, and it's too early for an April Fool's joke. I'm waiting for the Forsythia Old Wives' Tale to, instead of being 3 snows on the Forsythia bloom, be 3 snows on the earliest planted soybeans.
Oh, that's that might be something for kind of future climate lore, right? So thinking about those things. Yeah, my Forsythia bloomed on the 6th of March, and so I was already talking about it. I was at an event and talking about how I hadn't seen any, and I got home and it bloomed while I was gone. I was in Mansfield on the 6th for an event, and it bloomed while I was gone that day. So it was pretty interesting. Yeah. And typically, it's just a rough estimate of how many, we see some wet snows in March, April, and sometimes even May. So it's not unheard of, but generally, we're coming to a close on that. We've already sort of talked about too, the mucky conditions out there already in a lot of areas, still a little bit dry. We talked about that. So lingering dry conditions across West Central and Northwest Ohio. Our stream flows have been really highly variable this winter too. Earlier on, we were actually getting pretty low ponds back in December. I think those have recovered pretty well across the region. And in that first week of March, man, we had temperatures 30 degrees above average across northern Ohio. So quite warm, and some heavier rainfall of late. So where are we heading? Honestly, when we look at climate signals, spring is a very trying time in terms of having confidence and kind of projecting into summer and fall in terms of climate signals. One big piece of news is El Nino is waning. It's decreasing. So those warm sea surface temperatures in the tropical Pacific are decreasing, returning back to neutral conditions, probably by the end of the spring into this upcoming summer. And then early indications are that we are going to develop the opposite phase, which we spent almost 3 years of it just recently in a La Nina phase as we head into next fall and next winter. So we'll save that piece for our upcoming podcast to talk about our impacts on next year's snowfall. Let's all keep our fingers crossed that we can see more snow. But as El Nino starts to wane, it really doesn't have a big impact on our spring and certainly not our summer. But March does look like the models are indicating that we're going to remain likely higher probability of above average temperatures. So warm conditions, warm soil temperatures, advanced phenological or growth stages across things for a while, with maybe leaning toward wetter than average conditions and certainly kind of loosening up those typical El Nino impacts that we see earlier on. So I think in areas that are dry may recover some more of that soil moisture. We still need to return to, a little bit of that soil moisture at depth, but it might keep the surface, a little bit mucky as we're heading in here into the rest of March and into April. So what's our advice every single year? Be ready to go when those windows open, right? That is pretty consistent. We've got strong long-term trends in increasing spring rains and overall precipitation and the intensity of that rainfall. So I think our advice stays pretty much the same, right? For the growing season is just be ready to go. But we still think opportunities to get things planted. We thought that last year too, and then things sat dry for 3 weeks. So we just, have to play along nicely with Mother Nature, even when she's not being very nice to us here, but certainly being ready to go, I think, is important. And then we can talk about the summer. I mean, if you're interested in thinking about a kind of an early look at the summer, I think temperatures will stay above average this upcoming summer. It's not likely we see an experience like last year in terms of strong northerly flow. Obviously, that brought a couple things: slow growing degree day accumulation last summer and excess smoke in the atmosphere. We do expect over the long term increasing opportunities for wildfire smoke in the air, but on a year-to-year basis, that northerly flow is pretty anomalous or not really what we expect. And so it's not like I'm going to forecast today smoky skies this summer. Let's hope not, right? Let's hope not. And certainly we do expect our temperatures to remain above average throughout the growing season. And precipitation is going to vary. I think the West will probably end up being a little bit better in terms of the amount of rainfall over the growing season. Maybe a bit drier side of things on the eastern side of the state. And then as we head into late summer, early fall, we do anticipate a pretty active tropical season in the Atlantic, and that could then bring some heavy, wet rainfall type storms to the region later on in the growing season toward harvest. But again, we've got plenty of time to talk about that in upcoming episodes of this podcast.
Yeah, we'll take the rain, just not the wind that time of year.
Yeah, exactly.
I think this is something that farmers just continually need to think about, is managing for soil moisture. And we talk about this a lot, over the last few years, is too much in the spring, too little in the summer. But then it can flip-flop on us. So, just encouraging everyone to keep an eye on the weather, keep up with Aaron's reports, and use that to inform decisions as you do your field work throughout the growing season.
Yeah, managing those the water extremes, I think that's our task.
Yeah, thankfully we still have plenty of water, though I wouldn't trade our wet springs for droughts out west.
No, that's for sure. We're water rich. It's a reason why we have companies coming to Ohio to join us. And it's always good to have that perspective that other areas don't quite have the luxury of the amount of water that we have here. So
climate.osu.edu. You want to give that a plug?
Yeah, so that's the State Climate Office website. You can sign up for monthly and quarterly summaries there. So just receive those in your email box, which provide this type of information. It being March, and March Madness is on a lot of folks' minds. And certainly there's one big Purdue fan on the call here today. Not me, by the way.
Not me.
I'm not sure about Amanda. Amanda said not her either, so you know who it is.
Boiler up.
Yeah, whatever. So we won't talk about OSU this year. But anyway, so it is March Madness. It's also March Madness for our CoCoRaHS. That's the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. That is citizen science-driven volunteer precipitation observer program that you can get involved in. And we're plugging that. That's CoCoRaHS, CoCoRaHS.org. To sign up, become a CoCoRaHS observer. all the states around the country kind of compete to see how many new signees you can get signed up during the month of March. And so the State Climate Office is plugging that. We like that because that gives us great information, like 2.99 inches of rain this week alone in the southeastern corner of Darke County, which was by and far, a lot bigger than just, say, 30 miles to the north. And so that's the type of localized information that's really helpful for us for both, creating products, also talking about these conditions that we talk about on the podcast and elsewhere. So those would be the two things to kind of think about. And look forward to our next podcast as we think about the growing season after we get planted here.
Yeah, good luck to everyone this spring. I really hope it goes well and is not a big stressor for you all. So thanks, Aaron. Always appreciate having you on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And good luck, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Hey, podcast listeners. Just a reminder to give us a like or subscribe so you know when we release new episodes. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to leave us a review also. We appreciate the comments.